Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and this is going to be one exciting video. Yeah, I've got a lot of cool things planned out. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at setting up your own local WordPress development space. I've done a previous video on this topic, and I thought it would be a good time to provide a little bit of a follow-up. There's a few other things that we can tack on to that original work and make it really extra special in terms of being able to give you a lot more options and freedom for developing your own plugins, your own themes, everything you want to do with WordPress, all self-contained within Docker. All right, so let's get going. First of all, let's just create a new folder for us to work in. I'm just going to call mine WordPress Local Development. As you can see, I've opened VS Code and we've got a fresh new project here. And we are going to get started with some exciting stuff. All right. First, we're going to create an environment variables file called .env, just right in the root of this folder. And all we're going to have in there is just things that we don't want to check into Git or any kind of source control. I'm just going to be creating some variables here, and then we are going to be building up a Docker script, a docker-compose script bit by bit. All right, here we go. So in our .env file, I'm going to have a variable called container name, and this will just make it easier to see our images in the Docker desktop app. So I'm just going to call it my app, and then we are going to have some database-related environment variables, database name, and I've just given it a name of WordPress, database underscore user is user, database underscore password is password, and database underscore root underscore password is just root underscore password. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And then let's create our docker-compose YAML file. Okay. So first things first, we are going to get started with a proper web server. We are going to be taking a look at Nginx. So let's go ahead and create a services key, and we'll give it a name of Nginx. And for the container name key, we'll just use the container name that we defined in the environment in the .env file. Container name dash Nginx. Okay. Let's see if we can. There we go, one down. All right, and then for an image, we're going to be using Nginx 1.15.12-Alpine. And for a restart command, we're only going to restart it unless it's stopped. For an environment file, we're going to use our .env. Okay, and our ports, we are going to define as, we're going to expose port 8080. And internally into the Docker image, it's going to be listening on port 80. Okay, and then we're going to set up some volumes. So the first one is going to be to our Nginx configuration. So let's say /Nginx and then /etc/Nginx /confd.d:/rw. And I will explain what this means. All right, so we are going to be now creating a folder in the root of this same project. Just call it Nginx. And then within that, create a file called default.conf. CONF. And let's take a look at this. Okay, so this will be just a basic Nginx configuration for us to work locally with WordPress and all these images that we're going to create in Docker. So we're going to define a server and then have a listen on port 80, default underscore server. Okay, and then our root is going to be at /var/www/html. And for our location, we're going to put a location slash So basically we're mapping the default route to be to handle an index PHP, and then if there's no index PHP, then look for an index.html. Okay, so that's all we need to get started. We'll be adding more to this later on, but let's go back to our Docker file. So what we're doing here is we are downloading the Nginx 1.15.12 Alpine image. We are exposing it on port 8080, and we are creating a mapping between our local Nginx folder into the container at /etc/nginx/conf.d, which is the folder where the Nginx configuration files are. So we will be creating a local configuration. We'll be overwriting the one that's in the Docker image here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this up. Okay, so I'm going to open a new terminal within VS Code and then just docker compose up -- build. It should be building by default since this is the first time we're going to be running this. Okay, and you'll notice that it's using the container name that we've specified in the .env file. Here is my Docker desktop app running here, and here you can see we've got the container running, WordPress local development, and the MyApp Nginx image is up and running. And so it's listening right now on port 8080. So we can click right here and it'll try to open it up in our local browser. And we're getting a 404 because as we've defined in our setup for Nginx, it is looking for an index.php file. We can confirm that here right in the logs. We made the request and it's looking for index.php, which is not found. Okay, so this is a good sign. It means our Nginx image is up and running. So let's go ahead and stop that. Just use the stop here or docker compose down. So good, we've got an Nginx container up and running. And now what we're going to do is we are going to be creating our database. So let's go ahead and create a new service here. So make sure it lines up with the Nginx defined service above. And I'm just going to call it database. And I'll give it a container name, container underscore name of container underscore name dash database. And for an image, we're going to be using MySQL 8.0. And for restart, we're going to be using the same unless stopped. Okay. And then our environment file is going to be .env as we were using in the Nginx container. And then we're going to set up some environment variables. So we're going to define MySQL underscore database as database name and MySQL underscore password using the database password from the .env file, MySQL underscore root underscore password, which we'll define in the .env file again. And finally, MySQL underscore user defined from the .env file at database underscore user. And you'll see here we've defined a health check. And what this is going to do is every 20 seconds, it's going to run this test command, which is basically just a ping to the local host within this image, and make sure that the database is listening and alive. And it's going to retry 10 times. We are going to be exposing this on port 3306, which is mapped internally into this Docker image at port 3306, which is the default MySQL port. Now, because we want our images to be talking to each other, our different Docker images, we need to put them all on the same network. So let's go ahead and define the networks. And we'll just call it internal. And then down here at the bottom of our Docker compose file, we will create a networks, internal, and then driver bridge. Okay, and while we're here, we're going to define a volume for our database. So volumes, and we'll just call it DB data. Okay, and then up here back in the database, we are going to create a volumes section. And we're going to map it to DB data :var/lib/MySQL. And this is just setting up a volume for our MySQL data to be stored on. Now, just to test our database, to be able to log into it and take a look at what's going on, I usually use phpMyAdmin all the time. So we are now going to set up another Docker image for that. So let's create one here called phpMyAdmin. And we'll give it a container name of container_name phpMyAdmin. Okay, and for the image, we're going to be using phpMyAdmin/phpMyAdmin. We're going to be using that same environment file definition, so env_file of .env. And then we've got some environment keys that we're defining here, which will be defined within our .env file. This database root password is this one right here. Okay, and we'll be exposing port 8081, which will be mapped internally to port 80. And finally, it will be on the same network, so we just need to make sure that we're defining it on the same network. Now, notice here, the PMA host is defined as database. So this database is the actual image name of our database. So if you've called database something different here, like let's say database_2, then you need to make sure that this PMA host is using database_2. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it as database. And so far, everything looks good. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Okay, so we got the log files coming up here within the Docker desktop app. So notice how we have the three images now of MyApp Database, MyApp Nginx, and MyApp phpMyAdmin. Okay, so everything looks okay here. See it at the last line of this log, we've got MySQL D ready for connections. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go ahead and look at port 8081. So right here again, we can just click on this. It brings us right to here, and we can log in with user and password. Okay, and notice how we have our local database here now. We've got the information schema and performance schema, which are defaults in MySQL. We've got the WordPress database. And of course, it's all empty right now. We have no tables, but at least we can verify that it's here and it's been created. So again, this is a really good sign. Okay, so let's go back and shut everything down again. Okay, so finally, we are going to be taking a look at adding WordPress, and we're going to be adding it in several stages here just to give you a understanding of how we're delivering the WordPress content locally as well as within Docker. So let's go ahead and create a new section here called WordPress, and it's going to depends_on -database. Okay, we're going to be using container name of container name -WordPress. For an image, we're going to be making use of WordPress :6.5.2-fpm-alpine. Now, this FPM is very crucial for what we need in our local setup. We can also use the Alpine version of this image, which is available in Docker, but all it is going to download and set up for us is a WordPress Docker image, which is fine, except in order to hook it up to Nginx, we need to configure some PHP support so that Nginx knows how to run PHP when it's being requested from the browser. So to handle this, instead of worrying about a lot of this configuration stuff on our own, we can make use of a Docker image that has all that available for us already. And this is in the phpMyAdmin image. For a restart flag, we'll set it to unless stopped. For the environment file, we're going to be using the .env. And then for our environment variables, we've got a few here: WordPress DB host, WordPress DB name, WordPress DB user, and WordPress DB password. And again, we're going to be using our parameters that we've set up in the .env file of database underscore name, database underscore user, and database underscore password. And again, notice here for the host name, we've got database port 3306. So again, the same warning that I provided last time, that if you change this database image name, then just make sure those same changes are reflected throughout the rest of your Docker Compose file. Otherwise, nothing will be able to talk together. Okay, and we're going to define a volume of, we're going to be calling it WordPress at /var/www/html. So we're going to be creating a WordPress volume similar to what we just did with DB data. So let's add another one down here called WordPress. And we also need to make it available at the Nginx level. So back in our Nginx section, in the volumes here, let's create a new one here called WordPress. And with the same mapping to /var/w/www/html. We will put it on the same network, internal, and everything here looks good. Okay, so let's start this up and we'll check it out. Okay, again, start up Docker with docker-compose up -- build. Okay, so it looks like the images have started up now and everything looks to be available. The logs look okay. Everything is still green over here. So let's go ahead and open up port 8080 on our Nginx. Okay, so we're trying to open up the localhost port 8080 and notice how it's still showing us this not found. And you may have also been noticing that it is trying to just download the PHP file because we never set up the configuration of Nginx to talk to the WordPress phpM image. So let's go ahead and fix that now. So go back here and let's Control-C to stop Docker. So back in our Nginx configuration, yes. So we haven't set up anything for Nginx to talk to WordPress in terms of handling the PHP. So we are going to be creating a new section here underneath location. fastcgi is built into the phpM Docker image that WordPress is using. So basically all we're doing is Nginx will talk to that Docker image. It'll try to hand over the PHP file that we're requesting, and it'll hand it over through fastcgi. And so right here is the important one, fastcgi_pass, and we're sending it to the WordPress host port 9000, which is the default phpM host. If you change this container name from WordPress, then just make sure you remember to change this WordPress name here within the fastcgi pass section. Okay, so with that defined, I think we're looking good. Let's go ahead and restart things. Okay, so everything looks to be up and running. Everything is still green on here, and let's go ahead and get into the Nginx page again at port 8080. And ta-da! We have our WordPress installation screen. So let's go ahead and set up a WordPress configuration. Okay, so site title, I'm just going to call it My WordPress, and a username of admin, and let's copy this key, or this password, sorry. Okay, and I'll just use an email of admin@home.com. Okay, so let's log in with admin, and then that key that we copied. And we're in. Welcome to WordPress. We're using version 6.5.2. Okay, so let's take a look at our basic WordPress setup here. And let's go ahead and just install a plugin. So we're going to install the Classic Editor plugin just to basically show that we can still work with plugins as you would expect to in any other WordPress installation. Except now we've got it locally. All right. So we've got a new plugin here. It shows up in the list, Classic Editor. Okay. And we can choose a theme. We've got the 2024 one currently active, but we can go through the existing list and activate whatever theme we want. So we've set up a locally running WordPress image through Docker, which gives us the ability to pull down the version of WordPress that we're interested in using and work with Nginx and MySQL for a database backend. But now what do we want to do when we want to do some actual work within our site? Let's say that we want to develop some plugins, or we want to work at developing our own themes. How do we do this? How do we set this up? Okay, my friends. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take a look, first of all, at our running Docker containers. Okay, so let's take a look at our Docker containers here. We are going to be looking at the file structure of WordPress. So if we take a look at the myapp-WordPress Docker image, if we click on it here, it'll bring us into the image itself. And we can go here, we can go over here and click on Files. And then it'll give us a directory list of all the files that are present within the Docker image. So if you scroll to the bottom and navigate through var and then www and then HTML, you'll see all the files for WordPress. So they've been copied into this Docker image. Okay, so we have our WP-admin folder, which just basically contains all of the admin tooling and configurations and plugins and all that kind of stuff, PHP code for basically this admin panel stuff. This is the stuff that you should never really be updating unless, of course, you're working with the WordPress development team on updating the admin tooling. But normally, everyone using WordPress is either creating a plugin or designing a new theme. Everything that users build with is usually within the WP/content folder. So here we've got a plugins and a themes folder. And so our plugins folder has the plugins that are available on this WordPress install. So you see here we've got the Classic Editor. And then we have our themes. So we've got a folder list of themes that are currently installed by default in this WordPress image. So 2024, 2023, and 2022. Okay. So what we can do is, with the magic of Docker, we can set up a local file mirror between our working WordPress folder and this WP content folder. And then that way we can just keep in version control the plugins and themes that we're actively working on and that we care about. And we don't have to store any of this other stuff that are part of WordPress itself. So how do we do this? Okay, so let's go back in our docker-compose file. And down in the WordPress volume section, let's create a new volume entry. And it's going to be to ./src, so I just called it source. We're going to map it internally to the folder structure of var/www/html docker-compose.yml/wp-content. And then we're going to be appending another colon here and then calling it RW, which basically stands for read write. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to restart everything in Docker. Okay, so all the Docker images are pulled down, everything is up and running, and things are still looking green. So let's go ahead and go back into our WordPress setup. Okay, and we're back in business. Now, if you go to your local project folder, you'll notice there's a new folder here that's popped up called SRC. And if you expand it, we have our plugins and themes, which are mirrored from within the Docker image. So what this means is that we can work on a plugin locally and enable it in our local WordPress install, and we only care about working with the source control on that. Now, there is one kind of thing to remember, is that if you add any other plugins, let's add the classic editor again. Okay, so we see the new plugin here as we would expect, and then back in our folder, under plugins, we now see the new classic-editor showing up here as well. So it is a direct mirroring of what's going on to the WordPress folder within that Docker image. So you'll have to make sure that when you're working with any local plugins that may be in your you set up an ignore file, a .getignore file, to ignore all these other plugins that you don't really care about, but you don't want to delete them, because if you delete them here, then it will also delete them within the Docker container. And then it gets a little bit messy, right? Like if you've got them defined in WordPress, but then you delete their physical files on this side, then it acts a little weird, right? But this at least gives you a way of being able to do some local development on anything that you want to try out in WordPress. Then it will be, you can just save that and everything will work properly with your Docker configuration. You can play with different WordPress versions if you want to. It's just a matter of changing the docker-compose YAML file and the image name that you're using. So yeah, that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I thought it was a pretty cool experiment that we were able to get things up and running with WordPress. We've got a proper WordPress setup installed in Docker along with Nginx and MySQL and phpMyAdmin. And there's a bonus here of being able to edit your local setup to add or configure any other plugins that you want to build locally and test out locally before you publish them up to WordPress, or work on themes to do the same thing there. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you thought it was worthwhile. Please leave a comment down below if it helped you out or suggestions on what would make it better. And we will see you in the next one, folks. Take it easy. Peace. Hey everyone, I thank you for watching this video and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more, please subscribe to this channel. I'm also reading the Bible chapter by chapter over on my other channel, Bible Time with Wazoo. Hope to see you there.